Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today's video going to just be catching up on some maintenance on the RS250 and the Thunderbike ahead of Snetterton. So as you'll remember, a couple of weeks ago I was supposed to be racing at Donington. That didn't happen. If you remember from the last video when I did the channel update, my van had to go in for an MOT, which is like in the UK is our legal compliance check that just ensures that your vehicle is safe to operate on the road. Unfortunately, it would appear my van wasn't. I had to do a lot of work on brakes, a new headlamp, and a few bulbs that had blown across the vehicle. So unfortunately, due to the amount I had to spend on that, I cancelled the Donington weekend, which was a bit disappointing, but hey ho, I need a vehicle to get to and from race meetings, so I felt it was important to get that done. Again, I didn't film it. It's not my cup of tea. I don't really enjoy doing that work, and you wouldn't have got a particularly passionate video out of me. But my van now has all new brakes, has a new near side headlight, and all of the lamps that weren't working are now replaced and functional, and I have an MOT for another year. So I can get to all the race meetings in the future. Next one being Snetterton, I think at the 300 circuit next weekend, which is the 6th, 7th and 8th of June. But don't quote me on that, I might be out. No, sorry, 7th, 8th and 9th of June. Which is a track that I've gone reasonably well at in the past. I think I had my first ever win at Snetterton, if I remember right, on the old circuit. So really looking forward to that. So a few things that we need to do before that meeting. I've got to rebuild the water pump on the RS250, and we'll get into that in a minute. And I've got to still polish up the side panel for the 748, and I've got to do some basic maintenance on there. So I've got to change the oil filter, and I noticed that there appears to be a small pinhole leak coming out of the oil cooler. So I'm going to quickly swap over the oil cooler when I've got the oil drained out, put an alternative one on, and then try and find out where it's leaking from. It's a really fine mist that is coming out that's just sprayed on the inside of the fairing. So it's either like a pinhole or a small fracture somewhere. So I'm hoping that if I can find it, I might be able to just cover it up with a little bit of liquid metal and it might still be usable, but it depends really where it sits on the oil cooler. Okay, so first things first, let's go on and do the RS250 and get that water pump back up and working. Okay, so if you remember in the last update, I had the water pump all stripped down, and the offending item, if you remember correctly, was the drive shaft for the water pump impeller, which had been pitted. I've got an aftermarket one that's been made, and that's arrived. I've got the seals that need replacing, so there's the part numbers in case you're doing a similar job. The water pump body gasket and the water pump cover gasket, and then all the pieces that were from the water pump, and then the rotor for the electrical system, because that has to come off to enable you to get the water pump off. Interestingly, when I've looked through the manual, it would appear that whoever built up the water pump body before me had the seals around the wrong way. So it might have been one of the reasons why the water pump was leaking. I think it's more to do with the fact that not only were they round the wrong way, but they'd also been hit with something to force them in and had created damage. So if you remember from that seal that was in there, it's been hit with a blunt object quite hard, which would have caused damage to the seal face because it wouldn't have pressured correctly. So I'm hoping now that with the two new ones, putting them in the correct way, we shouldn't have an issue. And as you remember the last time that we looked at the bike, I'm going to put the existing bearing back in because there's no damage to that. Okay, so first things first, I need to build up the water pump body with the seals and the bearing, and then we'll get on to putting it all back on the bike. So let's crack on with that then. Okay, first job first, we're going to stick this seal in. Now for those of you that don't understand how these seals work, they actually have a spring that sits inside on the seal face. You see it's got a little bit of grease already pre-impregnated into this, so I'm not going to touch that. But the pressure, so when this sits in the actual pump in its body, the pressure that acts across the back face of the seal actually helps push it on. I think it was leaking because it was round this way, so the seal doesn't work properly. So if you think about that being sat in there, the water pressure is just acting against the face, and it will eventually find a weak spot to push through. So it should be that way round. What I'm going to do, just to make that a little bit easier to push in, a little bit of silicone sealant. Just want to check that it's pushed home fully. It appears to. What I'm going to do, using the correct size tool, just give it a little tap down. Nothing major, just to check it's definitely in. It may appear to be there. It appears nice and flat on the face. Now I need to do the same with the oil seal. Now I need to just drop the bearing into there, getting the right size face. Just push that in nicely. Just check we haven't dislodged any of the seals. They look all okay. Okay, you notice I've cleaned off the face just of any. There was this like blue gasket material that was around some of the pump, which I'm not a big fan of. So I've cleaned that all off. New gasket. Okay. And this can actually only go on one way. So you'll see that that only goes on that way. So there's like this sealant material that's already pre-impregnated onto the seal, so we've just got to be a little bit careful that we don't damage that. What we also need to do is gently push this through. So I'm just going to put a bit of silicone grease on there. Just push that gently through. There we go. Yeah, nicely done. A little bit of grease there. That needs to sit there for a second. There's a little copper washer that just goes on the back face there, and then we put on the water pump impeller onto that shaft. Okay. This isn't done up actually that tight, it's only done up to 12 Newton meters. Just put something to hold in the back of the impeller. There we go. So that's one rebuilt pump impeller. Nice and free to turn. So let's go and put this on the bike. I was going to put the cover on, but I'll leave that until it's on the bike, because actually it's easier just to align. You've got this little cutout in the back of the impeller drive shaft, and that needs to go onto the balance gear, goes on the end of the balance gear. So let's get over to the bike. Okay, so that's the water pump, its intermediate body, the cover and the generator back on. All of the cover bolts are done to 10 Newton meters. This is a little vent plug, and this one under here is a drain plug, and then the stator nut is done to 60 Newton meters with a little bit of medium strength thread locking compound in there. I've got the oil to top up because you have to drain the gearbox to get this pump cover off, so I'll top that up in a second. But that's now the pump body hopefully all back together, new seals, new impeller drive shaft, new gaskets, all connected back up. Once I've got the oil topped up and topped the water up, we'll go for a start and just check that everything is sound. Okay, so let's get these fluids topped up. Hi everybody, so conclusion to this video. Was supposed to be filmed at Snetterton because what I was going to do was just show that everything had worked and we had got the bike to a running state and we'd get some onboard footage. Alas, I'm stood in my garage again, which means something didn't go quite right. So both bikes are back from the meeting, so I didn't film the repair on the 748, which I believed to be a small leak from the oil cooler. Well, I changed over the oil cooler. That took all of about 5 minutes when I was doing the oil change. That was not the problem, it was masking a problem. I'll do a separate video on that shortly, but it would appear that on the forward head, i.e. the horizontal one, there is a small leak of oil coming out of the cam cover, so I think that the camshaft seal might be leaking, so I'm going to do a change on that and film that. On the RS250, clutch was sorted, we had the water pump was okay, we had no water leaking out of the rebuilt water pump. I managed about 3/4 of a lap and the bike just died. We started taking it all apart, so we had the carburetors out, I had both the heads off to check inside the barrels and the pistons, took the spark plugs out to have a good look at them, and it would appear that I've got two possible problems. One of the spark plug electrodes broke while I was just trying to adjust the gap, so I don't know if it was weak or actually that was the problem. Plus, I think looking at the way that the cylinders were washed out when I checked them, I think that the float height might be wrong on one of the carburetors, so I'm going to just focus on getting that right. So unfortunately, again, no race footage from Snetterton. I managed a full session on the 748. And it was running really well, but the small oil leak was just a risk too far to take into a race, so I don't want to put myself or my fellow competitors at risk. And the 250 is just frustrating me, I think, is the key thing. It was an absolute beast when it was running, and I suppose I did 1/4 of a lap more than I did at Cadwell on it, so back to basics with that and start filming that. That's the end of this video. So a little bit disappointing in that we didn't get to race at Snetterton. Managed about half a day on the practice day, helped out a friend, acted as his pit mechanic for the day yesterday all day, helping to get his newly rebuilt bikes set up and working to their best. For me, it's back in the garage, get these two bikes all functioning properly. I'm not entering Brands GP because I'm going to just take some track time to make sure everything's dialed in and correct. So the next track time you'll see will be a track day, probably Cadwell or Snetterton 300, just so that I can get some time to get this all really working properly. If you've got any questions or comments about the water pump rebuild on the RS250, then stick them down below and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as possible. If you like the video, chuck us a like. It's a disappointing one, I know that. And if you're not a subscriber, we'd really welcome you to the channel. Okay, thanks for watching. See you later. Cheers. Bye.